In every care home and in every family, there's always that one person who keeps everyone else going. But what happens when their well-being starts to crack? Today, we're talking about the hidden pressure on the people who hold everything together and how they can care for others without losing themselves in the process. Whether you're an activities lead in care home, a nurse, a carer, or the person in the family who organises everything, the emotional load looks very similar. My guest today is Surraya Sadr, Head of Wellbeing and Lifestyle at Mindful Care. She's led wellbeing across large care provisions and now trains teams all over the country in dementia care, mental health and self-care. We're going to talk about the real pressures behind keeping everyone else okay and how you can start protecting your own wellbeing without feeling guilty or selfish. So, Surraya, thank you so much for joining me today. It's lovely to see you and a Happy New Year to you as well.
Happy New Year. Thank you for having me.
So let's dive straight into it. So lots of people think activities in care homes just means a bit of bingo and a sing-along. Mm-hmm. When you've been leading wellbeing across care homes, what did the job actually involve on a day-to-day basis?
So the wellbeing coordinator actually has quite an important role in a care setting. And when we sort of talk about wellbeing in care homes, it's so much more than just physical care. So it's about how someone feels about when they wake up in the morning, whether they feel safe in their environment. And a lot of people have gone into care homes living quite independently. They want to just feel connected and just feel like they're still themselves. And I think that's where the well-being really lives, in the everyday moments. So it's not just in the care plans. And I think activities and engagement just play a massive part in that. And that's kind of the key idea of the well-being coordinator in that role. So there isn't just, they're not just there to run bingo, as we say, or to run activities, but they're the person who actually gets to know that individual properly. Learn about their life stories and what makes them smile, what calms them down when they're feeling frustrated and what makes them happy. So they're often the ones that notice any changes first, and whether someone's withdrawn or anxious or just having a bad day, they are kind of able to adapt and meet people where they are in their own mindset. So good wellbeing support, I feel like is allowing that person to just still feel like they have purpose. And that's what an activities coordinator does. So that might be through conversation, it might be through activities, routine, or simply just sitting with someone. But it doesn't always have to be like a big group activity, which I think a lot of the idea is around. It's if you're not doing activity, if you're not seen, then nothing's happening. So, sometimes it's one-to-one, sometimes it's just spontaneous, but it can also just about being present. So, they support the wider team more than they realise, I think. They just bring, I feel, most of the energy to the home and just sort of create or set that real positive atmosphere to support staff and their well-being as well. But when it's done well, it will work for everybody. So residents will feel more settled and families will be reassured that staff are more connected to the people that they're caring for.
That's great. And that kind of leads me into the kind of next question, really. So in simple language, why does a dedicated wellbeing or activities role matter so much for people living with dementia or high support needs compared with just getting the basics done?
So I think when dementia is concerned, it's such a specific it's such a specific sort of you have to know so much knowledge and able to know how to connect with them. So there's a lot of challenges that they face. And working with people living with dementia can be really rewarding, and it also can be very tough, especially in that specific role. So one of the hardest things, I think, is how much things can really change. Yep. And someone who might love something one day and want to do nothing the next, but you're constantly adjusting to that person and how they are interacting. So you can plan all you like, but a lot of the time, they're just responding to how people are feeling in that moment. So communication, as I say, can be quite tricky. But when someone can easily tell you what they want and need, like you or I, and you're watching for small signs, so like body language, changes in behaviour, trying to work out what's going on sort of behind the scenes. And that takes a lot of focus and an emotional energy, I'd say. But I think this role is all emotional. Like there's a big emotional side to it. So if you really build a strong connection with people, you're watching that change over time or supporting them when they are distressed. It can really hit them quite hard. So when you lose a resident, for example, that grief doesn't just disappear because you're at work, but you're often juggling different needs as well. So trying to make things meaningful for one person without overwhelming another person. And sometimes limited time, I suppose, which is,
resources, time. It's things in all care homes.
And a lot of the time you're also kind of explaining to others what certain behaviours and a part of the dementia looks like. So just not someone who's, they're not just being awkward or difficult. You're forever trying to explain why they are presenting the way they are. And I think it's a role that asks a lot of you, emotionally and mentally. But it's so meaningful, like the work that they do is so meaningful. So it's really important to just be honest about how challenging it can be.
Yeah. Do you think it's kind of an undervalued resource that a lot of care homes don't kind of recognise or utilise in the proper way? I know that in my experience, sometimes individuals, they start off in this role of well-being and activities, but then very quickly they kind of go, oh, well, we need somebody on the floor. So can you just come and jump off and just come and do some care work because we're short-staffed?
100%. And I think in my previous roles, because I've worked as the wellbeing lead for a large care company, and my role was to support the wellbeing or activity assistants in feeling exactly how you've just described. So I think one of the reasons activity coordinators can feel so undervalued is because a lot of what they do isn't always seen or like fully understood. So when people often think the role is just about running bingo, as we said before, or putting an activities calendar up, the reality is kind of so much deeper than that. And like we said before, or like I mentioned before, like it's emotional labor. So you're building relationships and you're supporting the people through confusion, anxieties, and change. It's we might have taken someone who's living a very relatively independent life, doing things for themselves and coping, to having this environment where lots of other people are living there and their needs are different. So there's lots of anxiety around that, and on a daily basis as well. So you're adapting constantly, especially when there's someone living with dementia. And that work doesn't always come with obvious outcomes. So you can, it doesn't come with obvious outcomes that you can measure or just tick off. When it goes well, it can make it look like it's really easy. And that's usually because there's a lot of thought and skill that kind of goes on into behind the scenes of sort of organising what you're putting on. But as we touched on before, there's the time and resource issue. So activity teams are often very stretched, often have, they don't have full-time hours. So they're working within a very limited capacity, and sometimes most of them work alone. So covering a large number of residents with very different needs is really, really sort of tricky. And as you rightly said before, when staffing is tight, it can be seen as something that can be just pushed or picked up later, which kind of sends the message that well-being isn't as important as other parts of care, even though it absolutely is. But I think, what was I going to say? Another big factor is that there isn't always a fully inclusive care plan. or the decision making in what that person would like to do. I don't think that's ever kind of accounted for sometimes. So, they often know residents incredibly well, probably the best than anyone in the home, really, and sometimes better than anyone else. But there isn't insight. But their insight isn't always valued, I'd say. So in the same way, from like a clinical perspective, which can be really frustrating. And I think that was a lot of how a lot of my wellbeing coordinators felt on occasions, but especially when they're spotting changes early on or offering ideas that could generally improve someone's quality of life, their ideas or how they feel is often shot down, which is quite sad. But just going back to the emotional side of it, I think activity coordinators just put so much pressure on themselves in the role as well. So, when that effort isn't recognised or there's little feedback or acknowledgement, it can start to feel like the role doesn't matter. And even though they can see that it's making a difference, I think there's just a lot of the undervaluing comes down to misunderstanding and maybe lack of visibility, or it's just not fully recognised as how skilled you have to be in that role. So I think a lot of them feel incredibly undervalued.
It's quite interesting. Obviously, you've been on quite a variety of different jobs over your career. You started off you've gone from youth work, then over to occupational therapy and into dementia care, and now training. What pulled you specifically towards the wellbeing and lifestyle as your focus?
You're right. Originally, I studied at Nottingham Trent. This was back in 2011 now, so that seems so long ago. And during my time there, which I absolutely loved, my course covered a little bit of everything, really. So there was health and social care, how young people live in society and the justice system. But there was elements of mental health. And we covered things like anxiety and ADHD and poor mental health support. And of course, it was relevant to young people during my course, but a lot of that is interchangeable to adults as well. So that's where my interest in wellbeing really started, especially around mental health and anxiety. And I think from like a personal perspective as well, it made me quite interested in being able to understand how sometimes I felt about things, and just being a little bit more knowledgeable about how I could help myself. And I thought, okay, well, these techniques are actually quite useful, not just for me, but maybe I could support others in, how they feel. So whenever I used to do visits to some of our homes, it was almost like a little bit of a one-to-one counselling session where I could just try and help guide them back into feeling a little bit more emotionally stable about themselves. But after uni, I moved back home to lovely sunny Norfolk, and I started working at the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital within occupational therapy. And from then, I began to work with people living with dementia across the different wards. So I trained as a dementia care coach with the Norfolk and Suffolk Dementia Alliance, which meant I was able to kind of improve people's understanding and training across the whole organisation. And it wasn't just kind of one-to-one. So I think that kind of almost passion to want to help people improve their knowledge and their learning and how to practically how to teach them practical ways of how to then transfer this into their settings. So when I moved to my wellbeing role in 2017 with my care company, that involved a lot of overseeing across nearly 40 care homes and supporting a team of about 50 activity coordinators across the county. So it was a big role, but I really loved it. And coming to mindful care, it's just kind of like made me realise how much I actually do enjoy just working with people and seeing things from their perspective and just working together to see how we can improve collectively how we see dementia care. So my wellbeing sort of interest kind of sparked, I think, from years ago. But, it wasn't until maybe later on in my kind of learning that I realised that this is something that I want to take forward a bit more. So yeah, that's where I've landed myself now.
Well, that's it. You're now working with teams all over the country through mindful care.
Mm.
What are you seeing right now on the ground in care homes when it comes to well-being? What's encouraging and maybe what worries you?
So I think what's encouraging to see is that, the good news is that there are some really simple ways that care homes are starting to better support and value activities coordinators. And a lot of it just comes down to culture. So I think, first of all, what we are seeing that there is almost like a rising expectation that well-being is everybody's business. And activity coordinators are kind of like the specialists in it. So with the positive spin, it kind of means that involving them properly, that they are starting to involve them properly in care planning and handovers and conversations about residents and their care. And when their knowledge is kind of listened to and acted upon, it not only kind of improves the care, but it also shows that their role really matters. And another one, I think, is just visibility. So I think so much happens, or so much of the work that happens quietly, like the one-to-ones or the small little kind of impromptu moments, they don't always get noticed. So managers and teams are actually taking the time to ask, or like, how did that session go? Or what are you noticing at the moment? And it can make a huge difference. And that recognition, even in small ways, I think can really help how people feel more valued. But they're also allowing them to be supported and developed as well. So there's investment into the role, and they should have access to proper training, just like anybody else would. So having the time to plan and space to be creative as well. And when people, when they're supported in their role, given what we do, when we support people and train people in their roles, rather than just expected to just get on with it, we're seeing homes are sending a strong message that the role is a skilled role and it's well respected. But I think just sharing stories and, getting feedback from families and moments that well-being has, where we've seen examples where it's really made a difference, I think it then becomes more valued by everybody, because when activity coordinators are supported, the residents benefit, staff morale then improves, and then the whole home kind of feels more positive. So I think the places we've gone, we've kind of seen that there's a whole home approach to well-being now, whereas that culture change can be very tricky. We have been to places where, well-being coordinators and activities assistants are very isolated, and they get a tiny little office where they're expected to work, and that's where all their resources are shoved in. They don't get the time, they don't get the support, they don't get the contacts, and they don't get the training. So I think, we are seeing improvements, but I think there's still a lot to be done, and still a lot to be sort of said with how valuable they are as well. So it's a bit of a mix. It's and I really do think that depends on the setting itself and how supportive their managers are, and their mental health is just so important in the care setting as well.
You mentioned a little bit there. Obviously, I think with any helping relationship, which essentially a well-being coordinator or an activity coordinator is, isn't it? It's that helping relationship of those in the environment, like, which is the same as a mentor, a coach, or a counselor, or anything like that, which are quite high impact jobs emotionally. And some of our listeners aren't necessarily in formal well-being roles, but they are the one that everybody leans on. They're still in that helping relationship and things. So what signs should someone look out for in themselves that their own well-being is maybe starting to slip?
Well, mental health in care homes is just as important as physical health. So it can affect everyone. So the residents, the families, and the staff. But it's not something that we always talk about enough, I feel, and especially when it comes to the people working in well-being. But for those, mental health can be a real challenge of how emotionally involved the role is. Because I think when you're building close relationships with residents and you're supporting them through, loss and and confusion, frustration, it can lead to quite distressing moments. And I feel like they take a lot of that weight. And you're often the person that people open up to, and whether that's the residents or even colleagues, they carry a lot of that emotional weight. So along with the pressure of always feeling like they have to be positive all the time, and seeing like that you're happy and present in the home, and bringing energy and motivation. But behind that, they might be dealing with, grief when a resident passes away, or guilt that they can't reach, everyone in a day, or, might feel a little bit frustrated when well-being gets pushed off the priority list. And it can just build up very quietly. And I feel like there's often signs of feeling isolated. So, many activity coordinators work on their own, and without team around them. And that can make it harder to share how they're really feeling because there's no one to connect with. So you're constantly giving to others and there's little space to process your own emotions, and burnout becomes a real risk. And then on top of that, there's the challenge of adapting every single day, and plans change, residences, their needs change, moods change, and you're expected to respond calmly and creatively, and often or often with like limited resources and time. And I think the level of flexibility kind of takes a lot of skill, but it's really exhausting. And I think a lot of the concern from activities staff that I've worked with before is that they just don't feel emotionally apt to be able to manage these changes. And that's why supporting their mental health is so important, because they need space to reflect, proper supervision, peer support, and reassurance that it's okay to not be okay all of the time. And we really just need to ensure that their mental health is protected, because they're better able to support residents in a more meaningful way, that's sustainable if they're looking after themselves.
So for somebody who's in that position, absolutely others should be looking after their mental health, but I suppose it's them recognizing it in themselves as well, isn't it? And actually being able to go, hey, I'm struggling here, or I know I'm not in the best place right now. What can I do about it? What are the signs that they might recognize in themselves where they know they're kind of maybe disconnecting from this a little bit?
I think if you feel like you're just that disconnected, you feel lack of enjoyment, you feel pressure or even sadness about going to work, about how your day's going to be, or the expectations of you and what those changes in the day could potentially make you feel. So I always say to my coordinators, if you wake up in the morning ready for work and you're feeling anxious, you're feeling nervous about the lack of support you're about to get in the day, that could be a sign that you're mentally heading for burnout. If you don't feel that your passion is in it, you don't want to plan, you don't want to interact with people, then you know that there's something wrong. So it's really important that we take steps to ensure like there's good mental health practice and settings. So, when you're working in a role like this, looking after your own mental health isn't about the big sort of complicated self-care routines. It's just like small things, like realistic things that you can actually do in the middle of the day. And it's just supporting them with those types of techniques really to recognize when they're not feeling themselves. But I think alongside that, there's this stigma attached to it, as we just talked about before, that they are the well-being person. They're energetic. They're the one that brings the life. And, how dare they feel like burnt out by this? You chose this role. So it's just, I think, about staff looking after each other and recognizing when there are changes, because it's very easy to ignore it. And it's very easy to think, oh, I'll put that aside and I'll deal with that tomorrow. But, there'll always be a tomorrow. You have to keep telling yourself like there has to be a day one, there has to be a day one of me looking after myself. So this is what I always used to tell my coordinators, is if you ever felt like there was something that you just couldn't cope with, like, please reach out. And I think that was my main role. I did, like I say, I feel like a little bit of a counsellor, but also like a person to go to should they feel like this is the beginning of when they're starting to feel, burnout.
Well, that's it. Yeah. Therapists, counsellors get counselling.
Counselors get counselling. Yeah. And I think
so do hairdressers.
Hairdressers, I feel, honestly, the things that my hairdresser must hear in a daily, but my nail tech as well, like she's always telling me like just the stories, but it's just someone to talk to. And, I'm, even if it's a personal thing, I'm an impartial kind of unbiased person. So talking to someone who has no knowledge of the things they're talking about can often be more helpful, because I think it just gives you a little bit more scope to open up a bit more. Whereas you're talking to someone that, you're very connected to and care for, it's difficult to have that conversation because you don't want to be seen as, weak, which I think a lot of people, particularly males, can often feel. But I think one of the most important things is just to give yourself permission to have those feelings. So, you're going to feel sad, you're going to feel frustration and guilt and exhaustion. And it doesn't mean that you're bad at your job. It just means that you care. And I think when you acknowledge that, rather than pushing it away, it's the first big step.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a term you hear very often within the adult care sector, which is compassion fatigue. I hear it all the time within the children's services and foster care and things like that. It's often talked about, but I often don't hear it in adult services. So a bit of awareness about that. So just coming on to a little bit about, so when well-being doesn't really work in a home, when it becomes either tokenist or sometimes stops altogether, what are the usual barriers? Is it time, staffing, culture, understanding, or what are the main things you believe?
I think it's a combination of all those. I think the main thing we see is the kind of the culture. And I think it's how a lot of people have always been used to working a certain way. And you go into work, you have a checklist, you check off that checklist, and that's it, job done. It's, not about those in between parts. And I think there's, and I think for activities coordinators, it can be a challenge because of how involved the role is. But when we've visited places, I think a lot of people don't feel that activities is their job. And so I think that then creates this snowball effect about how people then feel undervalued, how they're always going at the job alone, and how sometimes it just ends up making well-being completely unsuccessful in the home because there's no team working together to ensure that it happens. And again, if we go back to kind of the hours that most activities coordinators have, they don't have a budget. Sometimes it's, no resources, no time, lack of support, and others just not believing in their job. And I feel like that collectively just indicates quite a poor culture within some homes. And that's really hard to change sometimes. And I think, and if you've got a management team who are the ones who are supposed to be rooting in your corner, if you have those people almost, if they're not fighting your corner, if they're almost accepting the behaviour of others, there's no wonder well-being doesn't work. And when we go back to how it affects your mental health, if they're not feeling valued and if they feel like they don't have a management support and they're the people that are key in making decisions in the home, then what's the point? Why am I going to be there? Why have all this time and effort that I put into, planning and making these lives more enriched? Like, what is the point? And wellbeing coordinators don't just run activities. They plan. When there's a Christmas party, who do they think organizes that? Who do they think gets all the entertainment in? Who do they think gets the decorations in, the invites? Who tells people? Who does all the marketing? Who gets the resources for it to happen? It's all them. And that's a one-man band who probably works 15 hours a week, but they've all got to do the documentation. They've got to have, intergenerational community contacts. They've got to liaise with other people in the family. It almost becomes near impossible. So when the expectations are so heavy, it kind of has like a little bit of a failure that kind of trickles down the system. And I think if you have that strong pillar at the top, a manager or a management team or even care staff that want to take some of that load off you, then you'll have a more successful kind of positive culture within the home. But again, yes, it's so hard to change.
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today. There's this misunderstanding, isn't there, as well, about related to activities around those living with dementia, that we're just organising an activity for those living with dementia, which is a one-stop. But if you were, let's say, organising a birthday party and you were going to have some 2-year-olds, some 5-year-olds, some 10-year-olds, some 15-year-olds and some 20-year-olds all attending this party, you needed to make sure that there was activities that were suitable for all of those different age groups, capacities, abilities, maturities and understandings. You'd know that would be a hell of an achievement to be able to do that. But people don't think about dementia in that same way, as far as actually the diversity, as far as skills, cognition, understanding, connection, and even the way they connect with the information and stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that scope that you've just described, like meeting all those needs, is almost kind of an impossible task, but they do it. And I think working with people living with dementia, as we said, it's very rewarding. But one of the hardest things, I think, is the kind of communication between everybody, and that the emotional side of it, is very what am I trying to say here? You're often juggling like a lot of needs at once, and we're trying to make things meaningful, and we want to make sure that everything is graded or catered in a way where everyone can enjoy it, because I think we try so hard to ensure that everyone is involved that we often make it either too hard or too easy for someone, when little small changes can make it accessible to everybody. So, we could take an activity like flower arranging. Cognitively, someone living with dementia might not be able to follow instructions step by step as someone who doesn't have a cognitive deficit. But if we can grade it in a way where we can, pre-cut the flowers for them, or we can have the vase ready, or we can give them the flowers to place them in, or even planting something, when we've done, we're supporting them doing the role rather than allowing them to just watch us do it ourselves. And I think that's also quite a complicated thing to kind of achieve. But I think in a care setting, it is so hard to make sure that you are looking after everybody in the state of mind that they're in presently, but also monitoring for any changes and seeing what we can do to then shift how we run activities to be able to kind of include them as well. But again, that massive job is just so overlooked. So it's like, oh my gosh, like you've raised all this money and, you've put so much money into putting resources in it from your own pocket, which occasionally they don't get back anyway. And they do it for the sake of the residents. And again, it gets overlooked sometimes.
Can you think of an example where you've maybe worked with a team, or you're aware of a team or an individual maybe who was struggling with well-being, and what actually helped turn things around?
I think, yes, I can. I worked with a team actually of wellbeing coordinators in a very large dementia-specific care home. And I think the difficulty was that in this, it was over 50 residents and there was 2 members of staff, and they were trying to do everything together. So it was almost like they didn't feel comfortable with managing activities on their own, almost through fear that something would go wrong or they'd need an extra pair of hands. So they were actually meeting less people and seeing less people as a result of going around in a 2. So the way we looked at that was we kind of acknowledged that there was an issue with reaching, all these residents. So you have to acknowledge that there's a problem to begin with before you start helping it. So what we decided to do, as this home was split over 2 floors, is we decided to split them up, and we put one upstairs and one downstairs and develop 2 separate plans to be able to cater for everybody, but also have the ability to cross over if we wanted to. So it was a lot of training with the staff and a culture change to ensure that they understood that well-being was a part of everybody's role. And if they have 20 residents in an activity sessions, then they can be there. They'll have the time to be able to come to the activity to support them. So the wellbeing coordinator didn't feel like they were doing it on their own. So again, I think that was a lot of training, a lot of exercises around how we can support wellbeing staff. And, it was tricky because it was a lot of trial and error and sort of allocating people roles in certain areas. But in the end, it worked really well for the home, where we managed to reach like double the capacity of residents because we then had the confidence. We gave them the confidence to be able to deliver these individually. But that was also a lot down to management support and helping encourage other members of staff to deliver activities, particularly when wellbeing coordinators weren't there. So I just think that that's a good success story, really, when we've gone to having 2 very unconfident wellbeing coordinators wanting to deliver activities together, to then having 2 separately run floors with one shared goal. And I just think because there's this expectation of them to always, run things in massive groups, when they sort of stood away from that and just thought, okay, well, realistically, not all of them want to participate in group activities. Not all of them want to, they're not all comfortable being in a big setting or a big room. It could be quite overwhelming for some people. So, they would dedicate time specifically for one-to-one instead. And they would just really break down what wasn't working in the home and how we can then improve it. But we also use things like resident surveys, what types of activities would they enjoy and what they don't enjoy, because you don't want to be putting on things that they just don't want to attend. So, us. And I think that's what a lot of people used to do. They'll think, oh, well, this home down the road, they run bingo 5 days a week, so that's what we'll do. And bingo's probably a bad example because everybody loves bingo. But, arts and crafts, we're going to do that 5 times a week. But then is that going to meet the needs of your residents collectively? Is that what they all enjoy? No, it wasn't. So let's let's put that on every other week, and let's actually put things in they enjoy. Let's get some engagement with the community. Let's get some children in. Let's get, entertainers in. Let's fundraise. Let's do things that they feel more connected to. So I think in this particular, it took a good year. I won't lie, but we managed to get it to such a good place where activities were something to look forward to. And I think just working with the whole team and just constantly trying to kind of feed that energy in, that if you work together, your job will be so much more enjoyable. You'll enjoy doing the activities and will play to everybody's strengths. So, if there's something that you particularly enjoy, even if you're a carer, let's lead that with you doing it. Let's initiate something that's going to play to your strengths. So that's just sort of one story that comes to mind, but I think a lot of it is communication with managers as well. So a lot of them just didn't feel, not that the managers were unapproachable, they just felt like what they had to say wasn't valued. So, I would almost try to support that and having the conversation with the manager myself, and kind of sharing how they felt so we could work together again to kind of make them feel supported.
Now, we spoke a bit about, I want to touch on a little bit about supporting the supporter. Obviously, one of the things is, I'm sure, we've already mentioned the importance of looking after yourself as far as being in that well-being role. But we joke all the time about self-care being about almost candles and bubble baths. But for people constantly caring for others, what does realistic self-care actually look like in the middle of shifts, in the middle of family demands, and when you have no spare time?
Yeah. So like I said before, we can often think that relaxation means we have to get in a bath that smells like roses, and and that might work brilliantly for some. I know personally that wouldn't work for me, because I think in my head things continuously tick over, and despite being busy, you still have those thoughts in the back of your head. So I think one of the most important things is, like I said before, just to give yourself permission to have feelings. Like it's okay to not be okay, and acknowledging that is the first thing. But talking to someone regularly, and whether that's a colleague or even someone outside of work who understands the role, and just being able to say, today was really hard. And without needing to kind of explain it or justify it, it's just saying that out loud can take quite a big weight off. So, just acknowledging that if a day was a bad day, once you say it out loud, it's like, okay, today was bad. Hopefully tomorrow is going to be better. But boundaries are really important. So it's easy to feel like you have to be everything to everyone, but that's not realistic. And you can care so much for something and still recognize that you can't reach everybody in a day. So recognizing that you can't do that every day in a perfect, in a perfect way, letting go of that pressure, as hard as it is necessary. But on a practical level, taking short pauses during the day really helps. Even a few minutes just to breathe and step outside, go and get a glass of water, have a cup of tea, and just reset between sessions, I think can really stop things from building up, because you're just taking your time to reflect on what's happened. And if you have any of those thoughts, or if you think, that, instead of saying, this today was really hard, you can just say, this morning was really hard. But then you've acknowledged that and you've moved on. But resetting between things, I think, can really stop that pressure from building up. But those moments might feel so small, it's that's not taking a bath or putting on some relaxing music, but like those small acknowledgements can be quite powerful. But as well as that, I think it's really important to reflect on positive things as well. So when you are drained and you're your brain naturally kind of focuses on what didn't get done. So you've got that to-do list going over in your head again. But taking a moment to just acknowledge the small wins, a little smile or a conversation. For example, I've got a 4-year-old, and when I'm feeling frustrated that she hasn't eaten her dinner, I think about all the things that I need to do in my head while trying to get her to eat her dinner. And that's my priority. So when she does eat her dinner, that's a victory for me. And I'm like, oh, good, small win. And it's such a little thing, but that then sets my mindset for the rest of the night. Like, this is going to be a good night. And she did. She went down fine. So it's just almost acknowledging that that's a positive thing. But just, I took that moment to kind of acknowledge that quick win. And in the care setting, it could just be like a conversation or a moment that you helped create. And that can help like rebalance that. But if you know when to ask for the support, whether that's to ask for more training or supervision, time or a plan, or just to say that you're struggling, it's not a weakness. It's a sign that you're actually taking your role seriously and yourself seriously as well. So just mental health and looking after it isn't selfish. It just allows you to kind of keep showing up and showing up for others in a way that's healthy for yourself, and sustainable for you as well as them.
So for families whose loved ones are in care homes, for instance, is there anything they can do or what they can do to support and encourage the wellbeing team rather than unintentionally sometimes maybe adding more pressure?
So when we have like a new admission into a care home, we often get the families involved. So when it comes to wellbeing, we kind of we interview them almost just about the type of person mum or dad or brother or sister or aunt or uncle used to be, what kind of things they like to do, what's important to them. And we really get a sense of their life history through the family, particularly if it's someone who can't communicate as well as they used to. And I think when we involve them, they feel a part of the care planning, and we then kind of establish anything that they'd wish to get involved in the future. So whereas there can be a lot of pressure from families, mum didn't participate in this, or, dad told me that he hated that. And more often than not, it either didn't happen or, there's been a little bit of miscommunication there where we just haven't kept them informed. So I think when it comes to family, if we just continue to keep them well informed about the decisions that we're making, and almost like invite them along to things, allow them to feel a part of the care process, it can often kind of eliminate any kind of miscommunication between the teams. But I have found that wellbeing activities teams in general have such good connections with the family, because they are the ones that I think are always trying to support them in every aspect of their well-being. So it's not just the physical stuff. It is, the cultural elements, the social part of it, the cognitive element. Is we are always communicating with them to make sure that they are cared for in the best way. And a good team will make sure that the family is consistently involved. But also to allow them access to training so they too can see what it is that we're facing on an everyday kind of what our challenges are that we're facing every day, and to support them in learning about conditions that their loved one might have, or how to communicate better within themselves. But we will often have some kind of like boxes sometimes that we make up in the homes where, there'll be a cognitive box, for example, and in the cognitive box, there'll be lots of puzzles or colouring in sheets or mindful activities that the family can do with their loved ones. Because I think they come and visit them and, especially if they're not very communicative, they just don't know what to say or do with them. So we can go over with them a little bit about what we've done with them. We can talk about activities they've enjoyed and allow them to be a part of that process as well. It can be very tricky, because I think you can get two types of families. You can have ones that are very, very involved and like to be there for every event that you could ever organise, and others become a bit more distant, and they feel like it's best that the professionals just look after them, and sadly they don't get many visits. So, in both cases, we just try to make sure that that person in any circumstance is being cared for the way that we would want our loved one to be looked after.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Nice.
families can be a bit, especially when you've got like a dynamic family, you might have two sisters that don't talk to each other. Everyone's got a little bit of a different input about how someone should be cared for. It does become a bit tricky, but generally the wellbeing coordinators or activity assistants, as some say, are kind of like that mediation between the two. So yeah, I think they're important. That's a very important part of their job too.
So I know you've done some work at what's called the Wellbeing Forum. Is something you do. So when you're bringing together wellbeing leads and activity coordinators together in spaces like the Wellbeing Forum, what themes do you tend to notice keep coming up and again and again?
So I think for well-being, it's more about sort of communication. And, my background is in mental health and well-being, and Kate's is dementia. So they overlap very sort of, well, constantly, really. So it's, how can I engage with people better? How can I connect with the community, intergenerational stuff, but also something on documentation about how we can then ensure that we are consistently reviewing what we're doing, and how we're meeting the individual needs. So in the forums, a lot of it is about lack of support, lack of resources and time. So we then try to develop ways in which those things can be supported as well. And we do have, like I say, we do have a forum coming up at the end of April. And that's about supporting activity coordinators and the wellbeing teams. And that was just a chance to pick up fresh kind of person-centered ideas around activities that you can actually use, from music and sensory activities to reminiscence and movement and kind of themed sessions. But, it's such a wide scope, from lack of support to I just need some activity ideas. And a lot of them actually use it as a good networking opportunity, because they might not work in the same homes in the same county. However, their role is still the same. So just connecting with people and having that communication with someone who's, in the same shoes, whether they've had, the same disagreements with people, whether they've had the same difficulties in, resident engagement. It's just, what did you do about that? How did you overcome it? What did you do about fundraising? Because we don't get a budget. So, how did you do that? And it's just sharing those ideas. But we also talk about sort of dementia in the brain, and kind of share simple approaches like CST and the Montessori approach and the Namaste care, and how to protect their own well-being in that way as well. So in April, we've got a lot of speakers coming along to share kind of new tech ideas, and there'll just be so much space to connect with others who really understand the role. So yeah, I think it'll be a really good session. We're really looking forward to it. And hopefully it can kind of fuel them with ideas to take back to their homes and kind of put back into their every day-to-day role.
Awesome. So as we're coming towards the end, but if you could redesign how we think about wellbeing roles in care homes from scratch, maybe job titles, training, recognition, what would you change first?
I think the job title is a really important element of it. And I know activities coordinator or activities assistant is the sort of the go-to term. In my previous role, we changed it from activity assistant to wellbeing coordinator, because we felt that wellbeing was an overall kind of 360 view of it. It was the mind, the body, and the soul, sort of, if you wish. But when it comes to activities, I think that's where the misconception is you just run activities. You just do like bingo and colour and do arts and crafts and baking. And it just seems a little bit more child-esque, in my opinion. So I think just changing that role just kind of expands it and says, oh, actually, I'm not just about activities. I'm about, physical health, mental health, emotional health. I'm cultural needs, anything, self-esteem. Like, I'm about that whole package of one person. So, and when you really think about it, like, well-being is the heart of all care settings. So it's the everyday moments and the conversations and the connections that make those people play such a huge part in their role, and especially supporting with people with dementia. But it's a job that asks a lot of you, and being able to constantly adapt and pick up on the small changes, and supporting them through those hard moments, is why it's so important to look after your mental health as well. So other people doing this work too, but because when they feel supported and valued, they keep coming to work. So at the end of the day, it's about the connection and the dignity of helping people like themselves and those small moments that matter. And I think the World Wellbeing just really captures that in one. So I think that, yeah, and I think just having the support of the whole team. So I think there's a lot of work to be done with changing or shifting cultures, because how we worked 30 years ago isn't how we work today. And I think that's the real challenge sometimes. It's, we've had a lot of carers in this role for years. They've done it their whole lives and they're used to working in a certain way, and nobody likes change. Nobody likes change. But I think if we can just show them in a way where they don't have to change who they are or how they do their role, but just kind of adapt it to try and, accept that there are other elements that we now consider in a person's kind of life. And I think well-being is quite a new concept, I suppose, but I think it's something we're becoming more aware of how important it is. So yeah, I think it was still a lot of work to do, but we are getting there.
Last question for anyone listening, whether they're activities lead, a carer, a nurse, a family member, anyone who holds everything together basically, and they're feeling tired, guilty for struggling or close to burnout, what would you want to say to them about their worth and about one small step maybe that they can take this week to protect their own well-being?
I think that it's so important to remember that without your role, then the whole heart and center of the home wouldn't exist, because you are the core of how you are the trusted person that everyone would go to ensure that they are happy, and you do it at sacrifice to yourself. So you know what the job is like, yet you still go in and do it every day. And I think when we had, take COVID, for example, and we had this whole shift in how things worked. We weren't allowed to see friends and family. We weren't allowed to, see them or hug them. We had to look at them through a window. And I think that highlighted just how important the wellbeing coordinator's job was, when it ensured that we were combating loneliness and isolation, and we were making sure that everybody's health was better than our own. And I think that speaks a lot for the type of people that do this role, because I don't think everybody would. And I think they are very undervalued. However, I feel personally that they are the key central person within any care setting they are the glue that holds the residents together. So you are absolutely worth everything that your role stands for. And they're all worth their weight in gold. And I just hope that they do get the support that they deserve from the people around them. They are important.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today, Surraya. It's been really good. So for any of you listening or watching, if you think there's somebody out there who would benefit from maybe not just in the care sector, but anybody who'd be worth looking at their own well-being, then please like, comment and share this podcast. Cheers.